Hey Burns, how's it?
Well, doing okay, Dick. It's been a while.
Yeah, well, the rumor of my demise is greatly exaggerated. I'm still here.
Well, likewise, the doctors are brutalizing me, but keeping me alive.
Yeah, well, I know the feeling for what it's worth.
And as for the our podcast, which has kind of been on hold, I guess I'd ask our audience today to allow us at least one podcast to knock the rust off and kind of get our sea legs again. That's called a mixed metaphor.
Ah, is that like a smiley?
I I think I learned that at Claremont.
No, but is that like a smiley?
I, I don't know. But I had some thoughts on what we should discuss, and in our pre-meeting, you shot them out of the sky. So I'm going to let you open up because I have no idea where you're going, and now I have to regroup. And I guess I wasn't too entertaining in our prelude.
Okay, well, I expected to start off with you, but what still is getting me is it's the economy, stupid. Not that you're stupid, but that most people seem to be. And you got these people that don't want to go back to work. You have a place like Hawaii where the average home price is over a million now, and the people born here can't even get a house. And on one hand, I'm supposed to feel bad about that, and I am. But on the other hand, I didn't get to where I got by buying a big screen TV every year and a new car every, 2 or 3 years. We saved for 50 years and it worked out well. The issue becomes is people still don't seem to realize the issue is supply and demand. As soon as they started printing up all this money during the pandemic, the demand went up, but the supply was wrapped up in Los Angeles Harbor, among other places. And until you realize that and you address that, again, based on historical precedent, you're never going to fix it. You know, uh, people need to realize that there ain't no free lunch. And that really bothers me. The people that don't want to go to work because they can make more money on welfare. Okay. So that's the way it got set up. But that doesn't mean I have to like it or have to live with it.
The problem you touched on, but I guess I'll call it with my spin or take, is that somewhere along the line, and I would point to the Roosevelt administration, which, having run for nearly 4 terms prior to the amendment to the Constitution that disallowed, uh, kings to rule, Franklin Delano Roosevelt augured in a culture that government knew best how to do things, and that absent an overweening government and a growing bureaucracy, this country would do nothing but tread water. I think the roots of the overreaction to COVID, and I'm really talking about not the overreaction, the initial fears, which I think were understandable, both by government and by private citizens. But the overweening reaction in terms of programs and mandates and hunkering down the economy, while at the same time printing money like there was no tomorrow, which you correctly pointed to, what was the root cause of what will go on in this country probably for decades. I mean, unless we have a huge red tide and get the right people into office. And, that's going to be a roll of the dice. And to your point on creating demand absent sufficient surpluses, I heard today that General Motors, and I often say that I may get the number wrong, but it was hundreds of thousands of vehicles that have been manufactured by GM, and they used to say decades ago, as GM goes, so goes the nation. But they're sitting in parking lots at the plants waiting on chips from overseas. And that's just one example of what the global economy has wrought and how vulnerable the United States is once a magnificent manufacturing power to overseas markets. And by the way, those overseas markets in which we're not getting sufficient supply, but instead huge bottlenecks, we nonetheless had the largest trade deficit in our history. I mean, we seem to be living in a world now, and I'll say it, under Joe Biden, that if it can go wrong, it will find a way to go wrong. There just isn't much in the way of good news anymore. And I mentioned this before we started, Dick, but if there was one thing among many that the United States was known for as a young, growing nation, it was the work ethic. And as recently as when I was still at work, prior to my retirement, you would still see statistics on how Germans, as an example, took something like 2.5 to 3 times, and they call them holidays in Europe, the equivalent of vacations here in the US, but would take an inordinate amount of vacation time versus Americans who, let's say, were getting 2 or 3 weeks vacation, wouldn't take a third of them because they felt bound to their work and always felt behind and trying to play catch up and trying to get the next promotion. I mean, it was something to behold, and it seems like all of that has been crushed on the pandemic mandates. And as we emerge, we're finding the problems that you opened with. And they seem to be here to stay. Do they not?
Well, that was going to be my question. I'm the guy that always says, how do we fix it? But, it seems to be that we're on a trajectory that is not going to change. And, I'm thinking particularly of the, what is it? Don't say gay law in Florida. And I happen to agree with Governor DeSantis, that is a family type issue. It's something the parents ought to be able to cover, and definitely, to my mind, doesn't belong in kindergarten. But with the new woke culture, and I still haven't figured out what woke is yet, I don't know, it's like there's some secret hand, and maybe it's the global economy, I'm not sure, but there's some magic hand that's changing everything.
Well, let me put on my management hat. I'll give you a prescription, and I mean this sincerely. The laziest president we've had in our memory, in our lifetimes, currently occupies the White House. he doesn't work a full day, let alone a full week. He'll give a 5-minute speech on a Friday morning and then hop a plane to his beach house in Delaware. Or if not Delaware, off to Camp David. I mean, some presidents in the past, Trump, Eisenhower, hell, even Bill Clinton, were cited as goofing off a little too much on the golf course. But, you know, Trump just, he's not even president now. He played golf with Lindsey Graham the other day. If I played golf with Lindsey Graham, I'd make sure to slice one into the back of his head. But nonetheless, they talk shop for 18 holes. I mean, they're working events. But Biden, because of his dementia or his advanced age or other health issues, whatever the case may be, can't put in a full day. Well, doesn't it follow, Dick, that if you have a country where you can't drag people into the office, that the last thing you need is a lazy leader?
Well, the sad part of that analysis is, what's the alternative? Vice President Harris?
No, I'll tell you what we would
Third in line is Pelosi. I mean, it's worse. I think it would be worse under those two than it is under Brandon.
You know, you may find this odd coming from a conservative. When you know, I was in high school and John F. Kennedy became president, I had that, I'll call it, youthful fascination with a young, vibrant president. Now, of course, some of the vibrancy of John F. Kennedy was going into after hours things that I would hold him accountable for today. But the feeling of a vibrant, active, fully involved individual in the presidency, the job of the nation as he saw it, and dealing with some issues he had that were mostly kept from the public, but he had some medical issues stemming from his World War II service, particularly a bad back. And nonetheless, I mean, he was an active guy. And I'm saying this as a man who just enjoyed his 75th birthday. But I believe we need a younger man or woman in the presidency right now to revive not just the presidency, but the nation. And that's quite honestly, I'd like to see someone come in and resume Trump's policies, but I'm not so keen on Trump being the guy to resume them. He's going to be on or near 80 if he runs, and I'm about up to here. I know right now, at age 75, I couldn't do the kind of job I did as an executive in my 40s and early 50s. Those kind of jobs demand a commitment and a physical ability that not all, but most seniors just can't pull off.
I agree with everything you said, but then that leads me to the next question. Who is out there that could at least put a stop to and or fix and or whatever the trajectory we're on?
I'll give you two names as an example. Ron DeSantis in Florida for his executive strength in running a major state. I think that kind of executive ability, and he appears to me to have it in spades, I keep hearing that Trump may nominate him as his running mate. And as I sit here today, and maybe something will change my thinking, but I don't want to see Ron DeSantis as Trump's running mate. I'd like to see him as leader of the party. The other guy who doesn't have the executive skill sets on paper, but there's never been a time I've seen him in action that I haven't been impressed. You talk about a direct, straight shooter who gets right to the heart of a matter, is Jim Jordan. Always in shirt sleeves, always ready to go. When he sits on a congressional panel, always seems far and away the most prepared. I just think the world of him, and I could cite probably a half a dozen other people, but you know, you pose the question, those are just two names that come quickly to mind that I like a lot. And there are people that can handle positions below the, you know, the president, vice presidential level, even cabinet levels that would be good for Washington. There is an attorney general in the Commonwealth of Kentucky now, a Black man that impresses me to no end. And similarly, and forgive me, it's either South Carolina or North Carolina. And darn it, his name escapes me. But I think the Republican Party has a lot more bench strength than the careworn Democrats. They've raised a coterie of people that only know the word racism and only know how to investigate Trump and don't tend to the knitting in the nation's problems. And the quintessential examples of that happen to be Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. And even though I'm an independent and a conservative, I think if the Republican Party puts the right people into the various candidacies from local level positions all the way to Washington, I hope that there's a red tsunami, both in the midterms and in the presidential election.
How about Trey Gowdy? You know, for a while, he was up there on the list.
If he were still in Congress, I would have mentioned him. I will tell you this, I've turned off a lot of cable news. You couldn't pay me to watch Bret Baier anymore on Fox News, and I won't go into why. But he marches to the beat of other drummers, not his own conscience. But I still turn on Trey Gowdy, who is with Fox News. He's on Sunday night. And you know, if he would re-enter the fray, he'd have my vote, if that answers your question, Dick.
Yeah, it did.
And by the way, he was a prosecuting attorney, not of the George Soros ilk, and he's just what the doctor ordered. I mean, I could envision Trey Gowdy being a hell of an attorney general. And instead of having him fighting on a dozen different fronts, restore law and order in this country and put criminals, indict them, try them, and get them behind bars.
Well,
may I segue?
certainly.
This didn't capture your imagination in our pre-meeting, but and I'll be brief. But I want to make a statement. I think the 53, some call them migrants, I call them illegal aliens. When I call them illegal aliens, I'm not disrespecting them as human beings or as creations of God. I disrespect them because they're jumping borders, which is a federal offense. And if they break the law, they're lawbreakers, pure and simple. But nobody should be locked into a tractor trailer in 100+ Texas heat to die a terrible, gruesome death like those people did. And I don't think the media has covered it adequately. I don't think the commentators have covered it adequately. I think Joe Biden is responsible with his open borders policy that he campaigned on, promised if he were elected, he would implement, has done so in violation of federal law. And I think he is an accessory after the fact to murder. And that may sound like strong language, but they've chased Trump from here to there and everywhere based on lies, rumors, innuendos, and the Hillary Clinton sponsored Steele dossier. But when we have a situation in Washington where somebody's policy via executive order is culpable for what the drug cartels are doing in terms of human trafficking, which is killing people, murdering people, raping, pillaging, blackmailing, opening up prison doors, payola. I mean, I think there ought to be a congressional investigation. Nothing I can point to, just common sense. Money is the engine of politics. Are you telling me these drug cartels that are getting filthy rich off of Biden's open border policy are not laundering money and getting it to the Democratic Party? I don't know. But we certainly have investigations on a bunch of other stuff, like the recent testimony, which was bullshit, that Trump sitting in the back of a limo was trying to reach forward and take over the steering wheel of a limousine to get to the January 6th demonstration, which the Democrats have purposely called an insurrection. They have a number of people now, including a Secret Service agent, that have said they'll go before Pelosi's kangaroo court and testify that the testimony this week was absolute, utter nonsense. So I'm here to suggest, as just one US citizen who does a podcast once a week with a dear friend, why not investigate what the cartels may be doing with their trillions of dollars of drug money and human trafficking money, in which they control the sovereign state of Mexico, and how they're funneling that into democratic interests that are opening up the borders to their mayhem. Is there a journalist left in this country that'll tackle that one? It damn sure won't be Bob Woodward. I'll stop.
No, I think it needed to be said. And hopefully our listeners will think about what's being said, which is why I asked, who could run for president, blah, blah, blah. I mean, we don't need Kamala Harris. We sure as hell don't need Nancy Pelosi.
By the way, Nancy Pelosi, who was instructed by the Archbishop of the San Francisco diocese, that as a Catholic, she could not receive the Eucharist because of her zealous pro-abortion stance, which includes abortion up until birth, She hopped on a taxpayer-funded plane, went to the Vatican, and received communion there.
You know, you just triggered a thought, and it's been sitting in the back of my mind for God knows how long. Why do some worry about the lives of immigrants or whatever, and yet these same people figure that abortion is okay? I mean, that seems like kind of a, I don't know, a non sequitur or weird or something.
I call, and I do it in my political commentary on Facebook. It gives a 75-year-old who's interested in politics something to do. But I call the Democratic Party the party of death.
The party of what?
Death.
Oh. But see, what really gets me, and it turns me off more than any of the others, is that the pro-abortion bunch figures, you know, my body, my choice. And I'm going, well, in that case, maybe you ought to use a condom or something else.
Well, interesting you should say that. Apparently, there has been a huge influx of men to medical offices asking doctors to get neutered, cut on, whatever the term is, so they can't get women pregnant. Now, what the Democrats are doing, in conjunction with people like Governor Newsom of California, and his name escapes me, the governor of Illinois, there are Democratic controlled states that, in conjunction with woke employers across the country, are saying that we'll fly you at taxpayer expense to a state that allows abortion, we'll pay for the abortion, and we'll fly you home.
Okay.
I mean, there are already people working on, getting around these issues, but I think it's important to remind people, since you brought up the abortion issue, is that what happened with Roe v. Wade and it being overturned is that, contrary to what the proponents of slaughtering babies in the room have talked about for years and argued for years, there is nothing in the Constitution that guarantees the right to an abortion. Nonetheless,
Hold it. Let me jump in here. But there is something that guarantees life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
yes, and that's the Declaration of Independence, which most professors who have studied the framing of the Constitution and the lives of the framers of the Constitution, and among the most important presidents in our history, would cite Lincoln as first and foremost the president who saw the linkage between the Declaration of Independence and the US Constitution, and called the Declaration of Independence the primary driver of what this nation should be, should become, and has become in many respects. And it's that language: the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And the fact that our nation and its political philosophy was grounded on divine law not the law of men. Our freedoms come to us from God. I could expound on this and not as well as some. You know, something we ought to do? Just a thought, Dick.
What?
Dick and I went to Claremont Men's College, which at the time was all male, and to its credit has since become a prestigious co-ed college in California. One of our most noteworthy co-students at the time we went to college there in the late 60s is a professor named Ken Masugi. Ken Masugi is a Lincoln scholar. He is a disciple of Professor Harry Jaffa. I did not take courses from Jaffa, but I've read his seminal works. And maybe sometime we can bring Ken on to one of our podcasts and talk about what you raised, Dick, and I tried to expand upon in my own crude way. And that is the linkage as well as the tension between the Declaration of Independence and the US Constitution. And in my view, how Lincoln resolved that linkage. I'm not saying it as well or as articulating it in as polished a way as Ken can do, but just for starters, look at the website called American Greatness, and Ken is currently published in the current edition, and typically publishes, I'd say at 2-week intervals, maybe, Dick. And he's also a member of the Claremont Institute, which I guess, for lack of a better term, is a conservative think tank, a prestigious one on the West Coast, and tied principally to the Claremont Graduate School, which is part of the Claremont colleges where we went.
Okay, let me be devil's advocate though, and try and explain to me, or explain, whichever you prefer, how can you be pro-abortion on one hand, and then turn around and worry about immigrants and this and that and everything else? I mean, how does one justify that?
I don't know how, because do they define life differently? If you're poor, destitute, illiterate in your own country's language, are you put into a different human being silo than, let's say, a black fetus born to a woman in Harlem? I mean, Joe Biden likes to thump his chest and say, if you don't vote Democrat, you're not black. As if that guy caters to black people. Joe Biden is a proponent of abortion. And although the demographic for black people in this country is about 14%, they have inordinately the highest rate of abortion in the country. You know, what Democrats make sure happen in black neighborhoods is there's two things available: Planned Parenthood and liquor stores. You're picking subjects that get me in a bad mood.
Well, that's okay, because I think there are issues that need to be brought up, and let me bring up another issue. Roe versus Wade being overturned did not outlaw abortion.
absolutely correct. And Dick, sorry to jump in on you. If every American with an IQ above 10 could make that statement and understand why that statement's correct, maybe they wouldn't be burning pro-life clinics in the country, or taking to the streets, or threatening Supreme Court justices at their own homes. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous. Actually, what the Supreme Court did is they returned to the states, and you always presume that representation is better the closer it is to the voters. You know, the old saying that all politics are local, but they're returning to the states the decision based on what their constituencies are calling for to make the decision about abortion. So as an example, if you think nothing of getting an abortion, you probably want to live in Illinois or California. And your ability to get an abortion won't be circumscribed. But maybe you don't go to Texas or Mississippi or Missouri. I mean, that's also the beauty of a union of states as opposed to a central government.
Well, you know, and actually, I'm purposely being sarcastic, because even if you were in a no-go state, you could drive a couple of hours and go to a go state.
Yeah, you know, back to your point, and I should have thought of this immediately, but you've given me a platform. You know,
Set you up.
well, what is it? I'm reframing your question a little bit, but what is it about Democrats? They're okay with millions upon millions upon millions of babies dying in the womb since Roe v. Wade, 1973. But 53 people die in a van that probably got up to 160 degrees inside, no water, no air conditioning, locked inside, couldn't escape. Hillary Clinton just this past week denounced the Roe v. Wade decision, chided Clarence Thomas. She loves to pick on Thomas, as they all do, the liberals do, because how dare a black jurist be conservative? You know, how dare that happen in this country? I'm sure that violates the Biden mantra. If you don't vote Democrat, you ain't black. But Hillary said what the upshot of Roe v. Wade being overturned will be is that women are going to die. But she never once said the open borders policy will fuel cartel activity in drug trafficking, specifically fentanyl, will fuel human trafficking, which runs all the gamut from blackmail to rape to molestation. She wasn't worried about those deaths. And I think that's your point. Here's a woman who aspired to be president, God knows may still run, who is Secretary of State, and she can't distinguish between the two. Sucking the life out of a womb or locking a migrant in a heated van without means of escape.
Well, you know, there's another argument one could give, since I'm now becoming woke, is running out of baby formula is no big deal. Because if a couple of kids die, it's still going to be less than the millions of kids that are going to be aborted.
Let me tell you something. You know what I heard today? And I'm not dismissing the baby formula. I can't imagine in the United States of America, you can't run down to the store, within 5 miles of your home and get baby formula. But you know what they're saying today is next? There's going to be a mustard shortage. Now, if I can't put mustard on my pastrami sandwich or my pretzel, I'll be writing to my congressman. How do you run out of mustard? You go for a drive in the country and all you see is wild mustard growing, everywhere. It's almost as if the Democrats, because they have Pete Buttigieg in the Department of Transportation getting nothing done, that they feel compelled to every week they put out a list of new things that the supply chain is going to wrap its arms around and sink into oblivion, just to try to anticipate the heat that may come around the corner next.
Well, speaking of the heat, I don't know.
What happens if they get rid of Depends and you can't get adult diapers? Holy.
Well, but see, speaking of heat, 2 weeks ago, it turns out there's a shortage of sriracha sauce. And if I can't put sriracha on my hamburgers and stuff, I'm going to write my congressman.
Well, I'll go one up the baseball bat. Imagine you and I finding out tomorrow that we can't top our Caesar salads with anchovies. I mean, what if there's a run on anchovies? I'm assuming that the anchovies come from the Japanese fleets because they're out, pounding the oceans, right? Aren't they the worst offenders for overfishing?
Well, yeah, but I think actually most anchovies come from Spain.
Oh, okay.
I
Well, I
think.
learned something.
I'm not sure. But the top brands are Spanish canned brands.
Well, I'll make a note of that. Okay.
But it's odd you mentioned that because I ordered out for a Caesar salad this week, just because I was lazy.
And you didn't get any anchovies.
That's correct.
God.
So I had to call and I'm going, what's the problem? I wanted extra anchovies. I was going to pay for it. And no anchovies.
A Caesar salad without anchovies is like a wedding cake without frosting.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay, so we've beat that to death. Let's see, what other questions did I have for you?
Why don't you talk about, you brought it up earlier, just point at the most recent press conference, if that's the right term. I think it was a press conference that Biden held in Spain, and I think he was at his butchering best of the English language.
Oh, you mean this one?
Well, yeah, apparently they didn't sync his hands with the applause meter, so they neither got audio or physicality.
Yeah. Well, let's see. What did he say? Oh, God, I mean, I just happened to glance.
Well, he blamed somebody other than the Russians for the invasion of the Ukraine, and then he had to correct himself.
I think he blamed Ukraine.
Ukraine invaded Ukraine?
Yes, I think so.
Yeah.
I can't follow it. The odd thing is, and I've said this before, Ronald Reagan obviously was slipping near the end, but somehow he managed to pull this off. So we got another guy who you would think he could at least do something. I mean, it's pathetic to watch him.
Did you see, I think it was maybe a week and a half ago, and I know Tucker Carlson featured it, but it was in a number of columns. but they republished the handheld. They're larger than 3x5 cards, probably because of his vision. So they're maybe like so. But the cards they give Biden before he walks out on stage, it says take 6 steps forward, lay these cards on the center of the podium, look up, adjust your microphone. I mean, they didn't read it, but it probably says make sure your zipper's up. I mean, it's just ridiculous. Can you imagine if there's a company in the country, large or small, with a CEO that needs 3x5 cards to tell them what in the hell to do? We're in terrible trouble.
Well, yeah, but see, my concern, and
This guy is a couple more years.
and that is, we're not only in terrible trouble, but the alternative is probably even worse.
I don't know what they're going to do, but the Democratic Party, now this, I'm being accurate, 76% of Democrats, registered Democrats, polled in the past week say the country is going in the wrong direction.
Actually, I think it was 78.
Well, you just had to contradict me. Okay.
Yeah. No,
I'll give you.
I think it was 78, but you're absolutely right. It was a poll taken last week.
Yeah. I mean, even the Democrats are up to here with them. That's their conundrum now, is how do we keep Biden, if he's still alive, from running again? How do we give Kamala Harris the slip? And were we to accomplish both, we meaning the Democrats, who do we favor as a nominee?
How about Adam Schiff?
I think they ought to go with Stacey Abrahamson. Surely if she can't win Georgia, she could win the United States. Because Kamala Harris didn't win a single vote in a Democratic primary and is now vice president of the United States, and the worst one perhaps in history.
Well,
every time she opens her mouth, the media calls it a word salad.
well, she's definitely something else. But then we've got Pelosi. Oh, God.
Well, she had to fly all the way to Rome to get the blessing of the socialist to receive communion. What must God think of that?
I don't know, but we've been on 50 minutes and I'm kind of burned out.
Yeah, well, we've hit a few topics pretty hard. I don't know.
I think it was worthwhile, and really what I want our readers to understand, to include my cousin who agrees with you more often than me, all I want people to do is think. The issues we bring up, many of which are unpopular, think about it. And think about what they can do to remediate some of these issues.
I agree. Everyone has to get involved in whatever way they can. And one of the things I would argue is don't presume that the paths or avenues that certain people take are by definition ineffective. Because I would argue a voice is a voice. And if you can change one mind, think of the cumulative effect in this country if people get involved. And by the way, when I say that, I recognize the left is very much involved. And I begrudge them the right to riot and to circumscribe the speech and constitutional rights of others. But I don't begrudge them, to argue and try to make a case for their political platform. I just think conservatives in this country need to get off their collective asses and do the same. And when we have people, I'll get my last shot in. When we have people like John Cornyn of Texas, our senior senator, who every 6 years puts on a plaid shirt, gets out a shotgun, and goes dove hunting while the political cameras are rolling. If he's a conservative, then I'm a Marxist. Thanks a lot, John, for red flag laws and the other compromises you made in the Second Amendment in the interest of getting along with the Democrats in some kind of a kumbaya moment. Texas Republicans who booed you loudly at the recent Texas Republican convention will have long memories and never forget what you did. And oh, by the way, John's next move is going to be to try to work with the Democrats across the aisle on an amnesty. So keep a wary eye on these rhinos. I didn't say I think I'd say something like this even 2 or 3 weeks ago, but Cornyn is in a league with Mitt Romney of Utah. And I say to hell with both of them.
Well, on that note, should we say goodbye?
Yeah, and by the way, I don't know how many people watch this podcast. They may have thought we had quit on them. But for those who do watch it, welcome back, and hope we do make you think and entertain you, and that you'll be loyal followers again. Sorry for the hiatus.
Yep, sorry for the break. And as I said at the beginning, the rumors of our deaths are grossly exaggerated.
Just, yeah, okay, I'll leave it at that.
Okay.
Okay, good seeing you, Dick.
Good seeing you too. See you next week.
And by the way, just give some thought if maybe getting Ken on would be fun.
Okay.
Okay.
Ask him.
All right, I will.